Welcome back, everyone, to the Fight Against Boredom Starborne Players Podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Fecca.
And I am Branksbro. 2 days before the beta launch, a guide about a self-destruct starting strategy was posted on the official Starborne Discord. Even though the guide clearly stated that this is an advanced strategy and only experienced players should try this out, a lot of new players are attempting the strategy to some extent. In order to diffuse any misconceptions, we want to hear the opinions of two people who did and did not self-destruct. We have Hohenheim here, who did self-destruct basically right away, and our Lord and Savior himself, Nihilus, who did not self-destruct. Nihilus, why didn't you self-destruct, and how did it go for you?
Hey, hello. Thanks for having me over here. I chose not to self-destruct, mainly, let's say, from ignorance, because I started off without, I went in blind in beta. I stopped looking at what was happening, all the developments that were going on. I stopped interacting with that because I just wanted to be surprised. So I didn't play the pre-beta, where I hear that was quite a popular thing to do by all the cool kids. So when I hopped on, there were a couple of things. First of all, there was this, premise I was going off of, which is, okay, I don't know, let's say necessarily the meta, so I'm already not inclined to self-destruct. Then I spawned in, I believe, 5 or 6 hours late, which put me to the edge of my spawning sector, which is Taurus. And it kind of put me, let's say, in probably one of the nicest spots I could be in, because since we're going up the Dyson, which is in Serpent, the distance, let's say, for me from Taurus to Serpents is quite straightforward. It's not like if, let's say, I got spawned in at the border of Taurus with Cygnus, or any other super awkward position, or at the back of Taurus. So for me, I already had a good reach, and coming in from Alpha 8 and Alpha 9, it was, I knew not to go more than 100 hexes, or let's say around that, just as an estimate, because then freighter times get insane, deployment times get insane, etc. So with 100 hexes in mind, I was able to find good spots for my second and third. So that was another thing that just didn't make it so I wanted self-destruct. And a final, and I think important factor is that since I'm coming from a Zeok background, even if I'm playing MPL now, as soon as I started, I saw like all these lower influence players around me that seemingly abandoned the game. I wasn't seeing a lot of activity from them. So that meant that I had so many NPCs around me to raid. And you don't get this anywhere else. Like, you have to fight off garrisons, you have to fight off maybe other people in the other areas. In Taurus, it's a cake day, basically. And as long as you have plunder and you are more active, you will get tons and tons and tons of resources. As MPL, I'm still, let me check, because I think, yeah, I'm 13 in rating at 2 million resources looted. And this is just like with 1k corvettes. So that's really the power, let's say, of the starting zone, I think.
Yeah, some people have been referring to the green zone as the cash zone. I now get it.
It definitely is.
So I've heard some people refer to their starting station as possibly a tool belt station. And I've seen you say that as well. Can you explain the concept?
I Bastion put that concept in my head about a utility belt station, and it makes a lot of sense, because you have a few things that you don't necessarily want to make on super specialized stations. Certain buildings, for example, like trailer manufacturers and truckers hall. Those are the ones that supply industrials quite heavily, and you definitely want to sack them, but they are the kind of things that you should ideally only get once, because otherwise it's just occupying building slots. And maybe for your other stations that are going into super dedicated positions, like super ice zones, moon zones, or MPL heavy resource zones, maybe you want to save those spots for something else. There's also cards that are very good and specialized. Let's not call them actually the opposite of specialized, like military logistics. That gives you freighters, which is always good, but you might not want to card it on other stations.
Yeah.
There's, off the top of my head, maybe some orgs. Let's say civic intelligence. Maybe you want to keep that for other stuff like Night Corps or something more useful. So you might as well just plop it down in a station that you're not particularly worried about, and you don't really care what's happening there because there's not much to specialize in your starting station. So you might as well just do all the quote unquote utility stuff, like Bastion called them. And it's a nice thing to do, to know that you can card it however you want, because you're not gonna care. You know, what are you gonna card it for? Range 3 on your mining facility. There's nothing worth harvesting in range 3. You're not gonna card a mining colony, you're not gonna card a hat dome. These are all cards that are very powerful to use on specialized stations, but this one isn't that. So it's quite refreshing to be able to get whatever you want
That's a very good
out of a
point.
station.
Often have I looked at these utility cards and thought that they're really good, but I just don't have any space on my stations to put them there. You want to
Yep.
specialize in other things, and having this utility belt concept of a station that makes those cards very valuable. That's a really good thing.
Yeah, or stuff like mission. So, for example, how vector scaling, which is just this lowly +2 speed card that is not, you would not really want to use this unless you are running hella missions off that station. But you don't care if it's on your first station. What else are you going to card there? And, you know, stuff like keeping the exosuit up all the time. Because, again, what else are you going to card? Just getting over with that station ASAP. Yeah, stuff like that. It's interesting, and I think aside from raiding, which is I think one of the strengths of your first station sticking in Taurus, and I think raiding is like that because of, again, of the level 1 NPCs, and because of if you are super active and got high plunder, you will outraid your neighbors even if they are active. But the other super useful thing you can do is to run missions, because if more people run missions around you, then you are always pushing the missions back away from you, and the neighbors are pushing them back in. So you always have this sort of endless supply of missions, depending on how insanely active you are. So that's, I think, another. There definitely are strengths that other spots on the map don't quite convey. I feel like. And it helps that you can do whatever you want with the station. You can card it however you want. You can just have this non-specific general utility handyman station that just covers everything, and you don't need to worry about cards or whatever. It's good.
There's a unique dynamic in the green zone that no other zone on the map really offers.
Yep. And it's scary at start, because at start everybody is in the green zone. So you're thinking there's no point in sticking here because the competition is ridiculous. Everybody starts there, so everybody is doing everything there. Everybody's flaring, everybody's raiding, everybody's doing missions, etc. But as you move on, people migrate, and not just with stations, and maybe people self-destruct and they completely migrate away. But people build new stations in new places and they move their fleets away. So that activity just kind of dies out. And I eventually converted my first station into running everything, flares, missions, and raiding, because I kept seeing, I'm obviously seeing that nobody else is raiding around me. I'm definitely seeing mission runs, but they're too far away anyway, so they are pushing it back to me. And I kept seeing flares that just went away. Nobody was harvesting them. And at this point, I'm confident I'm flaring more in the starter than I would be in my second and third. So it's sneaky, let's say. It grows on you, I think, a little bit, but it interacts with the dynamic of the game as well, because if people move away, then that just leaves more to you. if you stuck to your guns and didn't self-destruct.
I like that you said it grows on you. You just gotta give it a chance. Eventually, it'll grow on you.
Yeah, just save those poor people. Don't make them relocate. Don't be heartless.
Yeah, so let's talk to somebody that's done the complete polar opposite. Oh, and you, as far as I understood, self-destructed your station as soon as you could, right?
As soon as I could, but not as soon as I wanted to. Unlike Nihilus, I was not as concerned about the citizens on my station, and I told them to pack it up and to move off to somewhere else.
You want to explain some of the decision making, why you thought maybe that might be the best idea?
Yeah, I actually hadn't thought about it too much until Nihilus mentioned that he came into the server with a clean slate, hadn't done the pre-beta. Was it the pre-beta that we called it? The 2-week?
Something along those lines, yeah. 2.5 week pre-beta server.
So I had played it, and I had a lot of trouble with the green zone because when they did the pre-beta, there was an issue where there weren't as many suns around. So flaring was really difficult because I was in a zone that I think was supposed to have a sun, and for some reason the texture pack, some sort of model wasn't in there, so the sun wasn't actually around. And even with some of the starter buildings I built, I couldn't actually reach any of the suns near me. And there was also an issue where when I was playing that area, missions weren't all that proliferate. I think now actually they said that whenever you do complete a mission, it does favor, I guess, respawning closer towards the edge of the map. So it might be that's why now it has so many missions now, that all the missions that are being run are kind of favoring pushing out towards the green zone. So maybe that's just why there's a ton of them over there. So I came away from my experience really having a hard time getting out of the green zone because I didn't really have flares. The res wasn't all that great, and there weren't a lot of missions. So that was one of my reasons why I tried to favor trying the self-destruct method. The other one is I'm an MPL player. So I'll preach the good news of the MPL real quick. MPL really has a leg up, I think, over other factions in that their trading port has one additional range. And in this map, there's a lot of areas where you can get 3 large resource nodes in that range, which really boosts how much resources you can get on a trading port. So when I was looking around the map, I was seeing several spots where with a single station, you could get multiple of these. And if you had a mining facility and you card it for 2 additional range, you could get up to 4, maybe 5 large resource nodes under there. So my logic behind the self-destruct is, this station is great, but if I keep it, at some point, I'm probably going to want to get rid of it. And there are so many resource-dense areas on the map that if I can get rid of this, I could probably build 2 really strong stations that were just producing a ton of resources. And then I can stream those resources to then advance the build of my 3rd, 4th, and 5th station and kind of use that. Even though I'm taking a hit early on by destroying that station, I can then stream all of my excess resources to those other stations to cause their build to just keep going faster and faster and faster.
Okay. And so I have a little bit of a different one as well. We kind of have Nihilus here for the people that are just joining us, who talked about not self-destructing his station. Hohenheim self-destructed his immediately. I was actually under the opinion I would not be self-destructing, and about a week in, I was convinced that I had to self-destruct after actually viewing Hohenheim's station. So for the people that are kind of adding in here, that is like the worst thing in the world to do, in the 2.5 week server that Hohenheim mentioned, I actually also I did my immediate self-destruct then, and I had the reverse opinion after doing it. I had no rating because you're not hitting those level 1 NPCs. At the time, I had very few missions I could really be able to pull off because my fleets were split between the home sector, and I put myself way out into the arm with the plus 50 speed card. and I just couldn't manage doing that in the middles, like doing it with self-destructing and then now plopping 2 baby stations out there that I just wouldn't really able to handle. So about a week into the real server, I had kept my starter station, but every time I added something to it, I just felt like, oh man, this is, I would love to do this, but I'm not going to have ships down here. Oh, I need to put them back up. We also, at that point, we're going to a pretty early war versus an alliance in our sector. I felt, I'm going to just have to leave that there. Yeah, they couldn't raid it, but that's still one more station that I'm not using to aggressively claim points up near our dice and around our areas to guard. So with a lot of very specific things I had in mind, I felt in my particular situation, it was why I said self-destruct. And noteworthy, I'm also MPL. So all 3 of us kind of in different situations, all the same faction, all kind of the same ideas, all went through the same early war situation. And I think all 3 are now doing fairly well. I think I'm probably the worst off of them because I didn't rip the Band-Aid off early enough, but I think I'm still around rank 60 now, making it back alive from being quite below. And so, Branks, what was kind of your experience like then?
During the 2.5 week test, I wanted to try out keeping the first station around, thinking that it might not be my cup of tea, really. I don't generally like utility belt stations that are like the jack of all trades, master of none. More often than not, purpose-built stations to fill a certain role. But I wanted to see what I could do, and to me, it did not feel good. And I heard some people that tried the self-destruct, it didn't work out. I heard other people that said it worked really well, and then I worked with Fear on his guide. So I was probably biased, and I went for the self-destruct early, knowing that it's going to feel bad for a while, but it then can get better if you use the opportunity well. And that's what I think is a big point about the self-destruct strat. You have to have a plan. Where are you going? What are you going to do there that you can only do because you're self-destructing? And make that, try to snowball that small advantage as much as you can, so it's really worth it. Otherwise, you are wasting so much influence, so much XP generation. So, because we are, as most people probably know that play on server 1, going for a Dyson, so I set up close to the Dyson, set up shop for the Alliance station, get everything up that we want there, and just settle in. Really stake the claim, so to speak. And I feel at the 2-week mark, it started feeling good again. I went through the slump, I went through the tough times, soldiered on, and eventually it felt really good. And much of it, again, is, I think, because I'm MPL. All of us are MPL. And that's the point for us, because so this should be said, I think. We're coming from a certain perspective. We're going for resources because we want to build an economy that eventually is going to feed a Dyson sphere, or just feed a war effort. So that's how we're looking at it. I think we're looking at resource fields. We're looking at areas that can give us a better economy than the areas that are in the green zone. The green zone isn't necessarily bad, but it doesn't give us exactly the stuff that we might be looking for. It's more of a utility belt zone on the map. We're not about utility, we're about pumping the resources.
There's something else to be noted as well, coming from our perspective of wanting to self-destruct. We all spawned in a very heavily competitive sector, all basically right in the middle. Nino Nihilus talked about, spawning 5 hours late. He was actually like the last person in our alliance to spawn. So I imagine most alliances aren't like that. It's really hard to get Suns when you're going up against 30 guys that are all also very hardcore veterans that are playing like that. It's hard to raid against those guys. And then when I quickly realized, since I couldn't raid and do solar flares, my original idea was have my first station be an HSA, and I'll just ship all my ships out. I couldn't even build, a queue of HSAs without building buildings. I just wasn't making enough an hour. I think I was making less than 1,000 of each an hour. And I was looking at Hohenheim having one mining facility, making it over 1,000 of each. Like a few days, 3 or 4 days in.
Yeah.
That also guided my decision making. Once again, I saw that. I kind of wanted to mimic him. I realized I had a plan. I picked a spot out. I self-destructed, knowing exactly what I was going to do, basically for the next 2.5 weeks to catch back up, having a very clear plan in place. So those are the ones I see a lot of people talking about. We're all NPL, and that's what it is. It's not necessarily because it's the most OP thing in the world. It is certainly, like he said, because of the Dyson. I saw a lot of people also going Terran. We also, with this game, there's been a severe lack of resources. Naturally, early game, I think Terran and NPL are two factions that are going to do really well in the beginning, right? You're not going to want to go Tian Chao in the beginning. Like, you need to get these early resources. And I know we've had players that have been struggling trying to be team players and pick the Tian Chao role. So that is kind of really people wondering, okay, NPL. I didn't actually know that until we came into this podcast, and all four of us for that.
I think, yeah, MPL somewhat plays into it. It's pretty strong because of economy, resource scarcity. A strong economy is going to help you. But I think what also plays into it is really the fact on where on the map are you going. What's your plan? If you're going for a Dyson and you want to be close to it or in resource-rich areas, that might mean a great distance from your starter station, which absolutely plays into the whole planning of keep it around or not. Let's say you're going for strategic victory. You're going for the mechanisms and eventually into the center of the map. So the green zone is very far away from that. It's just a logistical thing. Yes, for us specifically, we're a very small group of 4 people, and all of us are MPL. That could skew the view of it. But I think any faction can do self-destruct well. It really depends on what you want to do. But
I'd actually,
somebody brought up a very interesting part.
Quick. Sorry to
Yes?
interrupt. I wouldn't say that any faction could do the self-destruct very well. We all are MPL, but I think that if I were to do this again, I would definitely go Terran for probably about a week.
Yes.
I think that if you are a heavy rating strategy, this is not as good of a strategy, depending on where you're going. And I think that if you're trying to do Atlas or Tian Chao, that's just a very difficult hill to climb. And if you want a challenge, and I can't even guarantee that you'll make it to the other side of the tunnel, but like it is hard. Like MPL and Terran have a lot of really good things under their belt. Really good industrial fleets early on. It's really good. The main reason you want a self-destruct station is you want access to better resource areas. If you're running more of a raiding strategy, like none of us can raid any of the level 4s where we're at. And it was a bit of a climb for some people who did this strategy that I know of to start raiding the level 3s down here. So it's just something to consider, that factions do play a bit into it. And MPL is definitely good, but I think Terran would probably be, if I were to try this again on a different server, I would try Terran and see how far I could push it.
I mean, as with any strategy, the faction you pick plays into it, right? You either adapt to the situation you find yourself in, or you adapt all your choices to the strategy you want to employ, right? Any faction has certain things they're good at, certain things they're bad at, and you can apply all of that to a self-destruct strategy or any strategy really, apart from Tian Chao. Like, they got nothing. But
Poor Tian Chao.
yeah. Something that somebody brought up is, it seems though that if you want to go for the territorial victory, it's implied that you eventually want to get rid of your starting station. Because claim in the starting area does not count towards that win condition. So I think that a lot of people are looking at that and thinking like, well, I have to self-destruct. What do we think about that?
I got one. So I've been thinking about this a lot. I have been, like, since making the videos, I do have a few people, message me and be like, well, I have to do it eventually. And I think that's what's causing a lot of it. I think territorial is a very easy goal to attain. It's a lot easier to understand than, the mechanics of unlocking a Dyson or waiting 6 weeks to really for the shroud to come down on the middle of the map. It really, I do hope to eventually see maybe re-adding it, but with that out of the question, I know we talked to Biggles a lot in his group, and I think it's also going without saying. I think a lot of his main group will be going for the territorial victory. And they brought up a very good point of why not wait to the last week? Your economy's huge. Getting an extra 10 influence points right at the end, suiciding that station, rebuilding it right out of the green zone, building a fortress, getting the +1 range for claim to get a huge claim jump right there 1 week at the end. You have enough resources to just pump it full, max out level 4. You should have a bunch of build Rs. So people that are really worried about like min-maxing their territory victory, that would be my greatest thing, to be like, if you're worried about the self-destruct, I know a lot of people want that instant gratification. Oh, I need to take care of it now. But if you wait, imagine like how if you guys are already building up, you're probably doing pretty well by now, about 2 weeks in. You got to think the game's 5 times longer than that. By the end of that, you'll easily be able to self-destruct, and it's not going to be a problem. And I think that's been the main defense for people that want to keep.
So, sounds again to me like a lot of it ultimately depends. Depends on your situation. Depends on what you're going for. Depends on what you encounter. Like there's so many curveballs that could be thrown at your direction at any time. I mean, I certainly had a certain plan when I went to the self-destruct strategy, and I thought about station placement. My second and third is going to be this and that, and somebody else like builds a station, and I have to rethink. That's the big thing I've always been preaching. Like, you gotta be able to adapt and overcome all these challenges. Nothing is really set in stone, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I like this question here in the chat is, what was your second and third station you were geared for? Both, I think we could answer that for both self-destruct and for non-self-destruct. If maybe Nihilus, you want to go first?
Sure.
Being the non-self-destruct option?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because the first station was basically never going to be anything else but an HSA, because you're not going to build a dome or a mining colony, or at least it's not. Out of all the inefficient options, HSA is the least inefficient, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
On the one hand, and on the other hand, if you go for orbital, especially given that what my role currently in Gravity is, which is to make ships and give them to people to lose them, it was okay. I'll go orbital and just focus on gunship, get them out as soon as I can. So it didn't bother me that this is just a lowly 2% moon. But obviously, the first being a HSA means that the second and probably the third need to be resource focused. And for me, I started the first thinking to raid around there because I immediately saw all these NPCs. I thought, if you maximize plunder, you are already, it doesn't even matter too much if you have competition, unless your competition maximizes plunder themselves, which is, you can find out, you'll spy them, you'll see what they have, and you'll just know to stay away from their close target. And that meant that my second needed to be an MC, first of all, first requirement, and second requirement was for it to be a flare station. And then I built my third, and I saw that I had a good spot where I could put up an MC and claim out a level 2 NPC. And once that NPC would die, I would get a 5% HSA as well out of there, which became my CSA, actually. So it kind of played out nicely in the sense that knowing that my first station was just going to eat up resources, I will need to fund it with passives from elsewhere. And that changed somewhere because raiding just keeps that station afloat easily. So it's now those passes from the second and third station are funding another HSA and light chip production and all that stuff. So, and endless Natashas. So it was an interesting discovery route. At every point, I thought I had a plan, and then I discovered something that was working out in a certain way, and I adjusted again and again and again.
As is Starborne.
As is Starborne. Yeah.
And Hohenheim, what's your experience? Yours has been pretty interesting.
So my goal for my first two stations were to build an economy base so that I could stream resources to whatever stations I had next. A lot of my role in this is whenever we build the Dyson, I'm going to be emptying out my coffers on a daily basis to stream as much resources to it as possible. So I want a good base for that. So my first station I built as a TP station, a trade port station. And then my second station I built as a mining station. one of the things you can do is each station can build an empire unique building that allows you to create a second, another tier of either an organization or an outpost. So looking at a lot of the early industrial areas, all the good tier 4 mining colony areas are covered up by level 4 NPCs, and they are they even killable? Question mark.
No one knows yet.
So I looked around and I was like, well, I'm not going to be able to build these industrial powerhouse buildings over these NPCs because it's just going to be impossible to kill them. So looking around, I realized I could build a lot of I could build a 2 trade port station and then use that to stream resources to my 3rd station, which would be, in my case, it was my 3rd/2nd station since I blew up my 1st station, to be a double mining facility station. In fact, though, if I were to go and do it again, the double mining facility station has been so lucrative that I would build that as my 2nd station off the bat. Like, the way you basically want to do is you build a station, you figure out where your 2 mining facilities are going to be, build one of them, and then just max it out to get as much resources as possible. And then once you have enough stored up, build the empire unique building that allows you to build another mining facility, then pop down your other mining facility, and then you're just going to collect like a ton of resources if you have a good spot.
And I've been posting kind of his stations. I really liked how he placed his 3 stations, basically hugging the Dyson sphere. As you can see, kind of our goal, and that's definitely something that helps with your suicide. And then I posted one of the pictures of his mining facility. And this is something I think was very underrated. I remember Hohenheim preaching it days leading up to the servers. Like, guys, I think this is going to be pretty good. And I was like, get out of here, Hohenheim. Like, that's not going to be that good. And then by seeing that mining facility station is literally what pushed me to self-destruct. And because I found a spot that had 230 points, and I was like, I got to get there before anyone else can get there. I don't have the IP. And that station now for me is putting out like almost 5,000, over 5,000 of both metal and gas. And my old station that I blew up, that I kind of replaced with, was only doing about 1,000. And I was like, man, because of that, I felt pretty good about in the end one. But Hohenheim was definitely my inspiration.
But again, that's because we have a certain intention of like just strong economy. On the other hand, the double mining facility station with range extenders for the mining facilities are very good candidates for ice belts for people that just want a lot of labor because they intend to fly a lot of ships. It's, again, options and situation.
And that's another good point, honestly, with mining facility. If you look at the ones Hohenheim, like I shared about Hohenheim, he did his mining facilities all resources. I decided to put mine on also labor spots. So you can really, there's a lot of flexibility with that build as well. But I think it's super underrated, and the double mining facility can be really powerful if you play it out right.
So, yeah, talking about ice. We're talking about meta and
Talk
meta
dirty to
shifting.
me.
Ice belts. I mean, come on. The stuff we can see there, how much labor we could get, but we have to clear them. And when do you go about doing that? And when do you make the sacrifice of just sacrificing ships and time to clear that? Is it worth it? Well, if you want to fly a lot of ships, it is. There's so much happening. I find it completely interesting. Like, and now we're talking to people that are playing mainly factories. Like, what are your views on labor? Having labor scarcity in the areas that are resource rich, but eventually you want some to fly ships, I guess. What do you think, Hohenheim?
I think it was interesting. I had the perspective as, my role being mostly producing resources and also producing ships, that labor was not something I was really going to have to worry about. In previous iterations, it was mostly just me pouring out ships and all that stuff. But something I realized is that before, I think there used to be a building that gave you a discount on the labor for heavy ships that you were supplying from that station. And I think they took it out of this current iteration.
Yep.
Is that right?
That's out.
So before, when that building was around, even if I didn't have that much labor on a station, I could still fleet one heavy frigate fleet with a station. So every station I built, no matter what, could, even if it had no labor at all, would be able to fly one heavy fleet. But that's not the case anymore. Now I'm only, especially in some of these, the trade-off of being in these very resource-dense areas, there's actually no labor in 4 of my stations that are around the Dyson. So none of them are actually going to be able to fly a complete heavy fleet, which is normally what we transition later on. Is a lot of the industrial players will be defensive and just stack a bunch of frigates on points that we just want no one to touch. So now I'm looking at like eventually trying to pick up my own labor spot, because I'm going to need 2,000 or 3,000 labor on a station just so I can actually fly some heavies and be a part of the defensive network we're going to try to set up. So it definitely was something that I only found this out yesterday. So you're constantly trying to evolve and figure out where are these things I assume I'm going to have, but now I realize I'm going to have a need for it.
How did that work out for you, Niles? Because as I understand, you set up in an area that has a bit more labor, not ice belt level labor, but some more labor.
Yeah, definitely not ice belt level, but I went, just how luck would have it. Monoceros is the sector that's between, like, next to Serpents, and Mono is like, my home, my soul is in Mono, and I couldn't resist it, especially when I saw good resource spots early on, and then I saw good enough, like they're not great, but it is still a 2K Habdome, which is, for me, as, again, MPL factory, more shipyard, it's not super crucial for me to get labor. It's nice that I have this option right now. But if I were Hammer, like I was on Flu server, oh my god, those ice belts, are you kidding? I mean, that's just ridiculous amounts of, wow. When you're a Hammer, what you want is to have maximum fleet slots and maximum fleet sizes, and just, to me, it's so clear that there's no way you do that without ice belts. And yeah, I don't know exactly the numbers you get in the ice belts, but I imagine at least a couple of stations need to be full-time dedicated for it. I know there are spots outside of them that give you decent labor, but like, I keep hearing the lovingly crafted phrase, I think, by Muse, of mediocre spots, and you'll find them. They're nice, but ultimately, when you want to get the most bang out of your buck, which, from what I understand, is the main draw of the suicide strat, is you want all your stations to give you the best, whatever you want from them that they can. Yeah, you'll go for you won't settle for mediocre spots, let's call them.
With the ice belt, I still fear that. I mean, everybody that knows what they're doing knows that ice belts are where the supplying stations for the heavy hitters are. That makes them immediate targets, or rather obvious targets. If you want to cripple an alliance's capacity to do large-scale warfare, you look at where they're set up in ice belts and you go target those stations, right? It's a very valuable area, but also risky in a way. You got to be prepared to defend that. Got to be prepared to defend anything you build, but that especially, I think. Still don't know how I feel about that, really.
I think,
yeah, you go.
This happened in Alpha 8, Alpha 9. You would, I mean, okay, in Alpha 8 not so much, because you would cluster around your Habdomes, but in Alpha 9 you would spy out an enemy main hammer, because you would see who in amongst your enemy is the guy that's wielding the biggest fleets. You would see where his Habdome stations are, and if they were possible targets, you would go for it. Otherwise, you would try to sabotage. So it's not like a new thing to target these definite weak spots in somebody's, like, naval power. I like the fact that they're a bit more obvious, so maybe for newer players hopping on, see the ice belts. If you look at the NPC description, it will say that they are slave camps, and the slaves are there, and they're harvesting and giving labor and all that stuff. And you will see it's very visual, which I love. Like, it's a lot of blue. You can see it's a lot of ice. You can definitely figure out, okay, these guys are getting labor from there. If I want to hurt them, I'll hit them there. So I think that's a good thing, and it's not necessarily like new, let's say.
Yeah, it's a bit more obvious where you want to hit your enemy if you want to hit their labor capacity.
Yeah.
And this is all actually something I've been dealing with as playing one of the hammer roles for our alliance. Something I'm starting to think about as I want to mitigate, like you guys are saying, the very clear and obvious way of hurting a hammer. I've actually moved over to Virgo, right to the left of Serpens, which is funny enough, as Nihilus mentioned, always been my home, and we just happen to be right in the middle of the two. So I've moved over to Virgo, and I've started to kind of poach on the outer ice things. And I see if you guys look in game, you'll probably see a lot of players that are on the ice belt, even though they may not be taking over all the NPC area, but maybe contesting some of the hexes there, or taking some scraps off the side, as there's a few like large ice planets and stuff on the side. So it's definitely something I'm thinking about as I move forward. I'm trying to also look for resource areas that are kind of close to the belt, right? I don't want to have my resource locations, really far into Serpens, really far away, or even I'm not even considering locations over in Mono, because it'd be very tough for me to not only defend, logistically shift resources, but you're also going to need to feed these ice stations. If you look on these Zayox stations, the Zayox slave camps right now, there's no, like the opposite of what Hohenheim was talking about around the Dyson is there's absolutely no resource. So they're going to need to be fed without a doubt. And so keeping anything kind of close to that, I think will be helping out too for any, aspiring hammer players thinking about stuff like that.
It's so interesting to me. Every time I look at the map, I look at where I'm going to put my next station. I have a certain idea what I want of the next station. And then you just look at the map and you see, okay, I will get this one thing, and I'll get a lot of it, but I'll get like close to nothing of this other thing. Like it's always some sort of painful choice of pros and cons that you're weighing. Naturally, you want the perfect station that just does everything, but it's not achievable. It seems now with the new map that it's just like more specialized. Every station is it's better at what it's good at, and it's worse at the thing that it's not specialized into compared to Alpha 9.
Actually, it's really bad because I find a ton of perfect stations that I have no access to.
Yeah,
one day we'll get through some of these some of the heavier NPCs, and we'll be able to get some really sweet spots. No matter who you are, like there are some spots further down the map where I think it's like one medium moon with like 3 large moons like all around it, so you could put like up to 3 HSAs that have 2 large moons and a medium moon. Those are ridiculous.
It's a trap.
Can you even feed a ship queue as hungry as that?
It's a trap.
We'll definitely
could-
try.
It could be a trap, but like you can have a whole conversation after I say this, after the trap, whether or not it's a trap. There are spots that we can't test to see if they're a trap because we haven't, we can't clear through the NPCs.
Yeah.
It's actually part of the game design I really like, because I feel like for a lot of times and for a lot of players, how well you progress in the game depends on who you bump up against. If you bump up against another group that is at your equal level of experience and time commitment, you can have a pretty good estimate of how much you've improved based on how you encounter them. If you encounter a group that's much larger than yours or has a much larger experience, you could have progressed a ton since the previous server you played. But having bumped up against them, you're going to feel like you've potentially regressed at how well you've done in the game. Having these NPCs and having them be very strong, I think creates a very good benchmark for players of all sorts and sizes, no matter how much you've experienced, to kind of figure out, all right, well, how well am I doing against the environment? Because I'm always going to encounter this environment, and this environment is harsh. So if I do better against this environment, that's a good benchmark for how well I'm doing as a player and how my alliance is doing at coping with this harsher environment that rewards you in certain areas, but it doesn't just give you everything everywhere. It's hard.
We've been talking a lot about NPCs blocking us from getting into areas that we want for that, be it resources, be it labor. But there's also NPCs now that just, you don't clear them out because you want to take their spot. You're just clearing them out because you'll get a reward as a module card. And I haven't seen or heard many people that have done that yet on a larger scale. I'm wondering how that will play out, because there are some pretty good cards in there. The cards that make you a lot better at certain things than if you don't have the cards. I think a lot of hammers will really want those, like 3 or is it 2% labor everywhere extra, or even 5% labor extra. There's credit income and stuff all like that. It'll be interesting to see.
I've
You can
certainly
get up to
been looking for
5%.
it. Yeah. Any NPCs I can get my hands on, I've been like specifically going out of my way to find the extra level 2 NPCs that like I was missing. I was like tracking them down, trying to find. I think it was like the settlement or something because it's really close to the green zone, so I couldn't find one. Because you want the extra credit per hour. How cards are adjusted. So yeah, that's been an exciting part that we really haven't gotten all the way into.
I've been looking at eyeballing an NPC that has a very specific card that I want. I'm like planning already. Like, okay, I'll build up until I have a certain amount of ships. Then I'll try to see if I have an ally that's close by that I can go there. Or no, well, I have to do it as a raid. Okay, do I want to build a station close by and raid from there, or do I want to do the long trip until I'm there? Because you can only raid from your home station. You have to raid in order to get the reward. It again is a sort of challenge that I have to work around, I have to plan around, and it's a new layer to the game that just wasn't there before.
We can definitely see Snugam's preferred approach of making people stay and suffer in decision hell. The pain is real, but it's good pain.
Yeah, and I hope it's comforting for new players to realize, like we're pretty large veterans of the game, and I mean it's daily. I'm like, why? Like, why did I do this? Or like, oh, I'm so regretting like this one decision. Like, was it the right decision? And you can't tell for like 2 weeks sometimes, right? And that's like one of the big gambles I think with self-destruct is, it looks good on paper, it feels good, maybe you have this huge plan, and then you realize down the road it's a really hard decision to make that you're not going to catch up for like 2 weeks. That's why
a good decision to face, or like in general, what makes a good problem to me is when you make a decision and you wonder if it's right or not, isn't because it's clear cut wrong or right. No, it's because of opportunity cost. You wonder like, okay, in 2 weeks, where will I be? Was it worth the sacrifice or not? Will this play out how I think it will? It's not you make the decision and the game tells you, you're wrong, go back. Everything continues as normal and you can still adapt and overcome, but you'll be left sitting there wondering, what if? And that just makes me want to play another match after this one and take everything I've learned and do it differently and do a match as Sayok and just solve every problem by raiding everything.
I want to touch a bit on what you just said about, decisions and making them and then regretting them and then this endless cycle, because I think it's important to understand that no decision is necessarily bad. Like, you might do something that is hamstringing a certain strategy that you were going for, but it's opening up new possibilities. Maybe might not be what you need, but if you keep an open mind to it, you might just be able to pivot easily. I mean, I want to say how in the starter zone right now, I am confident I'm flaring way more than I'm flaring outside of the starter zone. And that was interesting because when I started, I decided that my starter would just be a raiding zone station and even had like lay Apaches. And then later down the line, I realized, okay, I'm not getting any more flares on my quote unquote original flare station, which was my second. So where could I go? And then I looked at my starter. Every day I would send out my raiders. I would see flares that just went on by because everybody else moved their fleets out. Maybe they kept their stations, but their fleets weren't there. So I could now all of a sudden have this new, avenue. And it didn't matter that I had originally designed my first station to be a raider, because you could just take them down and rebuild. You just gotta, be open to the thought of it or just changing stuff. Because sure, taking down buildings is a bit of a pain. It freezes your queue. It's just annoying in general, but it's better to do it earlier, ultimately, even if you mess up. Like, I had to change out the Apaches because nobody else is raiding. So I'm going to put something more useful, like Helios or whatever. It's not the end of the world if you make a decision or a plan and it doesn't necessarily play out, but you could make something of it usually.
I've heard somebody call the green zone the cash zone.
It's true. And if I were Zeok, I would do just what Morb does, who is right now top rater on the server at, I believe it's, let me check, because it was 5 million resources. And as Zeok, I feel like you kind of have to, because at 100% plunder, nobody's gonna compete with you. You're just gonna vacuum all of the NPCs there, and there's so many resources in there. It's ridiculous. When I started raiding, I thought I would do big fleets, 800 Corvette fleets, and just send them out and raid them. And then I figured out, hold on, I can just have, instead of one 800 fleet, I could have 4 200 fleets. And that's enough to actually dry the daily production of all the NPCs around me. And if you're a Zeok at 100% plunder, and the people you're competing against are at 60 or 50% plunder, then they're never gonna beat your resource. They're never gonna skim through the top of the resources. You're always gonna get everything, and it's just gonna be more efficient. It's definitely a cash zone in that regard. It's just the trade-off then becomes, I have all my raiding and therefore combat ships in the starting zone. And if I am expanding, or my alliance decides to expand somewhere else, or if my alliance is engaged in a conflict somewhere far away, I have to deal with this extra long deploy time because all of my combat ships are raiding in my starter. And then once the conflict is done, you got to move them back. So, decision hell, always. Never not.
That's, again, opportunity cost.
Yep.
And that is, to me, a good decision. Like, it's not clear-cut wrong or right. And that, I think, or I hope for many, is going to be the takeaway from this episode, that there is no wrong and right. You see all these videos, you see all these tutorials, and there's wrong and right when it comes to mechanics, but strategy, the how you approach the game or try to get to your goal, there are so many different ways of doing that, and so many things can change over time. There is no wrong, there is no right, there's just your way.
Yeah, I've been kind of facing this as people are giving me recommendations for the videos I've been putting out, and they're like, "Man, like, could you do more meta? Or why isn't there stuff that says how you should do this?" Or, "Hey, give me the first 3 the first 3 station builds." And I'm like, "Oh, like the first 3 station builds, like just per play style or per thing, like there's immediately, even just 3 stations in, there's a million different variants, right? Like, and I'm so afraid to just put it out there, like, and I think a lot of the veterans feel this, right? If you answer a certain question, you're worried that people might take it as word, like, oh, so and so said, like, this is how you build your second station, and that's just not true, right? There's a million and one ways to do it. The best we're trying to do is just guide you to, here's just one, so you can kind of play your first round, use your first round as a mess up round, use it to kind of get ideas, feel things out. But I think in general too, the devs have done a really good job balancing exactly, like, I don't think there's a single building that I look at and I'm like, nope, would never take, or, oh, I don't have to take, or just even the domain ones that I constantly complain might be a little lackluster, I still have to take because I need 7 of them, right? So, and we're still arguing like which of the 7. There's no clear cut 7. There's a lot of different things. So yeah, that kind of stuff is so enjoyable in strategy games.
I think there's definitely there's an element that, as much as this is a new server, this is also a new map. For everyone who's playing this, whether it's your first or second time, like, we're all still pioneers on this. Like, we're only, like, what week is this now? 3, 4?
Half of 3,
Two
I
and a
think.
half.
Yeah, so all the elements aren't even uncovered yet.
Yeah,
We haven't even gotten
25%
halfway.
in.
Yeah, so there's so much of the game left to discover. There are so many decisions that may look good now or may look bad now that haven't panned out all the way. So, as much as people do ask us how we're doing and how things look, like, how we look in another 3 weeks might be entirely different. There's so much to be gained, and there's so much information that we just don't have yet, that I don't know, I would just encourage people that, yeah, if anything, like, jump on a server, try out some of these things. If it doesn't work, bag it away and try to figure out a plan for next time. I guess one thing I would say is, this is only actually my 5th server, and each one I've played, I've kind of looked at it from two different avenues. I've looked at it from how do I change what I'm doing based on what the game wants me to do, what stations it wants me to build, what fleets I need to play. You know, what are the, I don't want to say the right decisions, like what are the technical things that the game is trying to teach me to be better at. Always build ships, never stop building ships, always have something in the queue. But the other part that I've really enjoyed is reflecting on what I've enjoyed out of the game. So I really enjoy collecting resources and building ships. I'm not very good at flying them, and I'm a really terrible raider, as we found out yesterday. But I've spent that time understanding that that's something that I really enjoy doing. So now when I go into a server, I can do the things I enjoy out of the game and also know the things that the game wants me to do well. So it really helps my playstyle knowing that I'm enjoying the things I'm doing. And that's one of the things I really love about the factions is that, you know, you might not like sitting around and collecting a bunch of resources. You might just want to attack. And there are factions that enable you to do that. So find the thing that you enjoy out of the game and then have fun with it, because no one knows the right thing to do yet. We're all just trying to figure out where our playstyle fits in this crazy universe.
Maybe here's a question kind of going off that from chat. You're talking about different play styles. What about someone who just wants to hang out, learn the game, and not run into some big bad pre-mades or big alliances? What would you say to them, Hohenheim, as you went over all the other play styles?
If you really want like an open, like don't run to, I would say off the bat, well, if you're trying to avoid people who are doing a specific play style, like don't spawn the Dyson. The Dyson is a hotbed, we have found out, of content of people realizing there's some great spots in there. Yeah, I mean, I've met some people in the past who have done some very interesting play styles. I had one guy in the previous iteration that I ran into when I was trying to recruit for one of my alliances who had a goal of building a station in every single zone. And he did. He had one in every single zone. And he would run scout fleets, just sabotage people who he felt were too strong. And just, you know, no one could destroy him because no one had fleets that were willing to hit every single station in every single zone. So if you just want to play around with it, you can kind of go that route. But I highly encourage anyone who plays this game to find a group of people to play with. And if you don't like them, find a different group of people to play with. And if you do like them, keep playing with them. You get so much more out of this game when you're working with other people and you have other people to talk to about the game. Like I could try to talk to my wife about Starborne, and she'll give me the I'm paying attention to you because I want you to feel, you know, like I value like the things that you're trying to share with me. But she doesn't actually really care, and she'll probably listen to this podcast just to say she listened to it. But having other people that you can be like, oh, I raided this NPC and it was really hard and I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do it, but I beat them and now I got this card. Like other people in the game will appreciate that. Other people in the game will build that community that makes you want to log on because, you know, we did a poll on this earlier and I didn't include this, but, you know, the best ship is friendship. You should fly it all the time.
There we go. Yeah, the only winning strat is try to hang out with people that you enjoy hanging out with.
And that was kind of inspiration for this podcast for people that have been listening, or maybe if this is your first time. You know, we have these conversations like this basically every day. You know, there's like up to 10 of us basically daily talking, and we realize, you know, this is a huge advantage that, you know, we're trying to share, and we're trying to show people. Like just sitting on there just talking about a random build is the reason, you know, you find out about some crazy like, oh, this is how you should do a mining colony, you know. So joining up with those groups, doing the discords is just huge, trying to get that going. And I got a great from Floating Hit Point. If you want to play casually, don't play on server 1. Easy. That is something definitely to take into consideration. If you're trying to just learn how to play the game, always like, I know we say don't leave a server because, like, you know, you want to get the full effect of the server, but understand if you're going to be on the first server of an iteration, if you're going to be on some special server, if they do in the future, like or the first of a special server, like if they say like a smaller one, you're probably going to run into a lot more veterans that even if they're apathetic to your situation, they're saying, oh, you know, I'm really sorry, but I have to. You're going to be a lot more comfortable if you go to 2, 3, 4, 5, and I think even Like another one's even coming out today. So that might be a lot more comfortable situation for you.
All right. So it's been an hour. Thank you guys for coming and talking about self-destructing and all kinds of other stuff. It's been really nice.
Thank you for having us. It was quite fun.
Yeah,
So
no.
now people actually got to hear the voice of the great Nihilus.
Please, no. I'm still prisoner.
And
help.
make sure you ping Nihilus now after whenever you need anything. Solar flares not happening. Make sure you ping Nihilus. He's gonna give you solar.
Let the man sleep. I feel like he's just gotta like turn off his phone at.
Yeah. It's a sacrifice he's willing to make for the good of the people.
He's gonna cry himself to sleep after this.
Every night.
It's all
Alright.
good fun.
It's worse now that it's on YouTube. People will ping you at random times because they'll have watched the podcast and be like, "Oh, ping Nihilus now." So it's
Yeah. Just guys, thanks. It's been really thoughtful of you.
It's
Very
a
good.
pleasure, mate.
Oh man.